Good morning, good afternoon to all. I want to begin our Women Get on Board virtual speaker series today by acknowledging the land on which I live is in the traditional territory of the Anishinaabe and the Haudenosaunee. The Upper Canada Treaties cover this territory, and it is within the lands protected by the Dish with One Spoon, the Waupun Agreement, and directly related and adjacent to the Haldimand Treaty territory. Today, this area is home to many Indigenous people, and we're all grateful to have the opportunity to enjoy the natural surroundings of this territory. My call to action is to encourage all of us to become actively involved in understanding why land acknowledgements are essential in understanding Indigenous histories and contemporary Indigenous issues in Canada. I'm Deborah Rosati, founder and CEO of Women Get on Board, a social purpose company committed to elevating the next generation of women corporate directors. Our mission is to connect, promote, and empower women to serve on corporate boards with confidence and courage. We're more than 850 members across Canada, and we believe in the power of three. One woman on a board is a beginning. Two women on a board is a presence, and three women on a board is a voice. Today, we are delighted to be hosting this virtual event, our speaker series, with our sponsor, Osler Hoskin Harcourt. Our topic today is Board Diversity Matters. And we're really excited giving us a highlight from the Osler's Diversity Disclosure Practice Report. This is their 9th annual. So really excited, Andrew, to have watched you on this journey and the disclosures and the progress, even though at times it may seem slow when you go back to your original report. And so Andrew is a partner at Osler. He works, he's an expert in corporate governance, executive comp, and shareholder activism. I think his bio speaks for himself, and I can say I've known Andrew for a decade plus, and he is the expert in corporate governance, and it is a pleasure to have you here. Andrew, I will turn it over to you.
Thank you, Deborah. I am delighted to be here with you virtually today. Osler is a founding corporate partner of Women Get on Board, and we're proud to be continuing to sponsor its work. We're also equally proud of the work we do on our annual diversity disclosure report. We have been reporting annually for 9 years now, and our comprehensive report contains a wealth of information. We provide current statistical information on all TSX listed issuers that are subject to requirements to disclose the representation of women in senior leadership roles. We also provide current statistical information on all companies incorporated under the Canada Business Corporations Act, which are required to provide statistical information about women, visible minorities, Indigenous peoples, and persons with a disability. And in addition to that, we recognize those who have achieved gender parity on their boards and on their executive officer ranks. We highlight best practices for companies based on what they've disclosed in circulars for enhancing EDI. And we also highlight best practices from a disclosure perspective to provide inspiration to issuers to do more. And finally, we also do a review of developments in diversity over the course of the last year. So there is a lot of information in our annual reports. Our goal with our annual report has always been to provide companies with inspiration and the tools that they need to do more in terms of improving diversity within the organization. Today, I will share a few highlights from our current report that came out last month. And then we'll jump into a discussion with Michelle Bannock and Wendy Key, who are two very accomplished directors, to get their reactions and their views. And then we'll get into a Q&A session and answer any questions that you may have. So without further ado, if we could go to the first of our slides. And this is probably one of the most important takeaways from this year's report, which is that women are being added to boards at a higher rate than they have ever been added in past years. So the 45.3% of all new positions or vacant positions have been filled by a woman during the course of the last year. And that is a remarkably high number compared to the very, very low numbers that we started with almost 10 years ago. And that is accounted for why it is that now, on average, amongst all TSX listed issuers, women hold 29% of all the board seats. So we are almost at the 30% level amongst all TSX listed issuers. And then when you look at our larger companies, those that are in the S&P TSX Composite Index, we're at 36.2%. And then amongst the top 60 companies in the S&P TSX 60 Index, we're at 38.2%. So quite a bit higher, and we're getting quite a bit closer to the magic number of 40%. But let's get into the next slide, where we'll talk a little bit about how we are getting there. And you'll see from this slide that over the course of the last 5 years, there has been a large drop in the percentage of companies with all male boards. And while that drop has slowed, there's also been a drop in the number of boards with one woman only. And so what does this mean? Well, you can see that we are seeing boards gradually add more women over time. And in fact, just echoing Deborah's comment about the power of 3, we've been in a holding position now for boards with 2 women for quite some time, but the number of boards that have been adding 3 or 4 or 5 women have been gradually increasing year after year. And so really the change that's happened here is the evolution from just adding one woman to increasingly adding women to the boards of our publicly traded companies. If we can go on to the next slide. If you look at the rate at which women are being added to boards, you'll see that over the course from 2017 to 2023, it's been at a fairly steady rate. There has been no dramatic increase in any year. But the important thing to remember is that after 9 years of disclosure, we're still not seeing a drop in the rate at which women are being added to boards. And if we kept at the current rate of increase, we would, in 5 years, across all TSX listed issuers, hit the 40% mark. And in 9 years, we would get to gender parity across all of the TSX listed issuers. So again, the part that I'd like to emphasize here is it's been slow progress, but it is still constantly increasing, and it isn't showing signs of slowing down yet. We can go on to the next slide. In the past, we wanted to celebrate the companies that had achieved gender parity either at the board level or in the executive officer level. And we used to list all of the names of all of the companies because, frankly, there weren't that many of them. This year, we gave up. There are just now too many to really practically list them all in our report. And so now we are just showing how the progression is appearing year over year. And so that is, I think, an important differential over the course of the period of time. And we're continuing to see this gradual increase, particularly at the board level. It's been quite dramatic, less so at the executive officer level. We can go to the next slide. So in addition to women on boards, we also look at CBCA companies, those that are incorporated in the Canada Business Corporations Act, and look at the categories for Indigenous peoples, visible minorities, and persons with a disability, because those organizations are required to provide disclosure about representation of those communities amongst the board members and executive officers. So I'm just going to look at the board members here from our report. An important highlight is that visible minorities now represent 10% of all board seats amongst all of the CBCA companies, which is a big increase from 5.5%, which was the proportion that they represented in 2020, which was the first year under which CBCA companies were required to provide disclosure. At the same time, there has been very little progress when it comes to the other categories, Indigenous peoples and persons with a disability. Back in 2020, we had 7 Indigenous peoples represented on boards. Now it's up to 17. We're not even at a large enough number that we can talk about percentages yet. And similarly with persons with disabilities, in 2020, we had 6, and now it is up to 12. So very slow progress. And it is a bit disappointing, particularly when, if we can just turn to the next slide, we look at how the representation stacks up against the percentage of population. So recollect that women on TSX listed companies now represent about 29% of the board seats. When you contrast that to the fact that women represent a majority of the Canadian population, you can see that there's a lot of work still to go to get to parity. Amongst visible minorities, we're at 10%, which looks pretty good. But again, 27% of the Canadian population are members of visible minorities. So we have a long way to go there. With Indigenous peoples, we're almost at 1%, whereas the population represents about 5%. And then with persons with disabilities, the representation, at least on a basis of companies that have provided disclosure, is a lot lower than what's Canada's census data would indicate. So we still have a great deal of progress that needs to happen with respect to these other diversity characteristics. And again, we're just looking at here the CBCA companies. Right now, our securities regulators are looking at revising the disclosure rules and contemplating adding some component of disclosure relating to these other characteristics. And we may see some rules issued by them at some point during the course of 2024. So I wanted to just use the data to give you a few highlights. Again, the rest of the report contains many useful tools that will help prompt discussions at the board level and amongst the executive officer ranks, and will hopefully be inspiring to people more generally. But right now, I'd like to turn to our panel discussion. And I am delighted to have with us two, as I said, extremely accomplished directors. Wendy Key, who is the board chair for Ontario Power Generation and NFI Group, and is the chair of the audit committee for Centerra Gold. As well, Michelle Bannock, who currently serves on the human resources and audit committees for Empire Company, and is involved with Western University and is the chair of the Human Resources and Compensation Committee for BGC Canada, which is Canada's largest child and youth serving charitable organization. And today we're going to have a bit of a discussion. I'd like to start it off with just a couple of pieces coming out of our report. So, for example, based on our data, the percentage of board seats of TSX listed issuers has increased about 2 1/3 percentage points per year on average, and we'll get to 40% perhaps in 5 years, and to 50% in 9 years if we keep it up at that rate. So Wendy, what do you think? How long will it take, or how long do you predict it will actually take us to get to gender parity?
Thanks, Andrew. A pleasure to be speaking with you today. I think, Andrew, it's going to take more than 10 years. I think if there is not a push from regulatory bodies, stakeholders, shareholders, I think getting to parity is going to be difficult. And some companies might need a big push to get there. If their peers are doing it, they might tag along, but it is going to be a push. And I'll give you an example. So Norway started their push for gender parity back in January 1st, 2008. Their target was mandated 40%. So years later, 15 years later, they're only now at 45. I would have assumed they'd be at parity by now, and they're not. So that's a perfect example of how getting to parity is going to take time and effort.
Yeah. Michelle, what are your thoughts? What do you predict?
Oh, well, I couldn't agree. I couldn't agree more. I think that, and I've been known to be impatient, by the way, but I don't think we should really be happy with just 2.33 percentage points each year. That feels like pretty slow progression. And like Wendy, I'm not optimistic that in 9 years we'll achieve parity on boards, in part because of what Wendy has shared, and also I think the stagnant performance with respect to representation of women in executive officer positions also means that the talent pipeline is likely not being populated to be sufficient to reach parity in 9 years. So, my prediction is, I think we'll take some steps forward. I think we'll take some steps back until the commitment is intentional about developing women in executive officer positions so they are ready to take on board roles alongside other mechanisms. I hope I'm wrong, but I don't see this happening in the next decade.
Well, okay, fine. I have to agree. I mean, it is impressive that we are continuing to make that progress. It hasn't slowed down yet. But that, as you said, Michelle, you need people in the pipeline, and at some point we're going to see that impact, and we're going to see a bit of a slowdown, and it will affect our numbers overall. It does mean that it is important for women that are on boards to continue to network and support each other and provide opportunities. And it is going to need concerted effort by everybody. So my next question, I want to focus a little bit on targets, which we cover off in our report. And we noted that 44.6% of TSX listed issuers have adopted a target, and the most common target is 30%. We're almost at 30%. I mean, 30% was a big deal several years ago. We had the 30% club focused on just achieving that target. And now our S&P TSX 60 companies, our composite companies are well above that target. In the UK, they're above 40% already as at the end of 2022. And we've had 40% being recommended by the ICD TMX committee to chart the future. We've also had Ontario Teachers Pension Plan revising its target, asking for about a 40% level. So what are your thoughts on targets? Are they passé? Do we still need them? What's the right target? Is 40 the new 30? Michelle, maybe I'll start with you.
Sure, Andrew. And I should have led by saying, first of all, thank you to you and Osler for the commitment that you have shown to continue to surface these topics and do these reports annually. As for targets, I don't think they're passé at all. In fact, I wonder if there's any data to show us what the representation of women on boards would be today if groups like the 30% Club and others hadn't been pushing for targets to be adopted. I like the approach taken by the UK. If companies are truly dedicated to increasing the representation of women on boards, a target of 40% shouldn't be difficult to reach. And if I recall from your report, I think it's noted at mid-year 2023, women were not only added at board, to boards at a higher rate than ever, but women also comprised 50% or more of the board at 39 companies. So as you noted, gender parity is absolutely a realizable goal. Back to the talent pipeline comment I made earlier, I also think there would be a positive downstream impact on the pipeline of women in executive officer positions, because organizations would recognize even more intentionally that they need to continue to be developing their talent. And so a target like that, 40% target, to me would set a tone that would continue to emphasize the importance of not only the women representation on boards, but also continually building the pipeline.
Thank you. Those are very good points. And I might turn to Wendy. What are your thoughts in terms of targets?
I'm in agreement with Michelle. I like targets. I don't think we would be here today if it wasn't for those targets. So CBA says comply or explain, but comply or explain doesn't move the needle fast enough to get us to 40% or to parity at all. I'm lucky enough to chair 2 boards where we have over 5 women on each board. So I am over that 50% mark, the parity mark. And I've also been the first and only female on a number of TSX companies. And I would say like Deborah said, once you get the third women on board, make things a lot easier. Well, being the first female on publicly traded board is difficult. You are often hitting your head against a wall. You're often trying to push the governance standards, and you're getting pushback. But having a second female, a third female, changes the dynamic in that boardroom. So I'm all for targets. I think they're absolutely necessary to get the needle moving faster. And I think we need to do that. We're not going to get there.
Plus side is we're seeing that the institutional investors are pushing boards to add and increase the percentage of women on boards, and will make recommendations to withhold from voting from the chair of the governance committee if the organization is not meeting those targets. S&P TSX composite companies need to hit at least a 30% level or face a withhold recommendation. And some of the other governance policies that ISS uses and that other institutional investors follow also adopt a 30% level. So at some point, that 30% was going to increase, and boards need to be prepared for it and start planning for that in advance. So enough about the report. I want to come back to a couple of comments that each of you have made. Wendy, you made the comment about the challenges of being the first director who is a woman on a board, and I want to come back to that, but I might actually start with Michelle and talk about a little bit about sort of the pipeline and how have you moved in your journey to board progression, and what are the 2 or 3 things that were most important for you to achieve success and on boards in Canada?
Well, I'd say, the first thing is, for me, was a genuine interest in the organizations for which I serve. I feel really fortunate that I have the benefit of a nicely diverse board portfolio, which means my interest in contributing to each organization's success is varied. A second thing would be being able to articulate the value I bring and frankly, having the confidence to demonstrate it. As someone who has had a senior executive career in human resources, some will look at my candidacy through a narrow lens. And while on the surface, that might be fine, when I experience that, I also see an opportunity to complement that view by also reminding about other aspects of my career, including the fact that I helped to build a startup technology services organization. So I can bring a beginner's mindset to situations into the table. Or that I spent almost a decade at a global institutional investor, so can think like an investor with long-term objectives. And then I would say that the final point that's contributed, I think, to me achieving success in my board journey has to do with investing in my professional growth as a director. So this can be regularly sharpening the tools in my governance toolbox, or creating a learning plan to understand more about the trends or external pressures in a particular industry or sector.
So it's a constant journey, constant education, but you are leveraging talent and you are recognizing that you have things to contribute at the board level. And one of the biggest impediments that we used to face, and I think it is still there to some degree, but not to the same degree, was a requirement that members of the board be former or current CEOs. And that was a large impediment, because when we look at the percentage of women CEOs, this is back to your point about the pipeline, Michelle, they represent roughly about 5% of the CEOs of all of the TSX listed companies. So if you narrow your focus to just CEOs, you're not going to be able to increase diversity on the board. The recognition that senior executives with a broad range of skills can add value to the board for all of the things that the board is required to do as part of its oversight has largely done away with that as an impediment. Still there to some degree, but it is a recognition that there is talent out there. You just need to get rid of some of the artificial barriers that are there. Wendy, what about the 2 or 3 things that were most important to you in terms of achieving success on your journey?
I would say my first one is finding a mentor. I've been lucky and extremely lucky to have a number of mentors during my board journey. And they've been tremendous in terms of helping me understand my role. Or if I've run into a situation where I didn't know what to do next step, they were great to listen. And so being able to, in my current role, give back on some of that mentoring, I think is really important for the next generation, as Michelle was saying. And I've done that a number of occasions, and it's great for me personally to understand. And these women that are coming through the ranks, I would say, would make a better director than I did when I first started, because they have so much more information and they understand the role of the board. My second takeaway is understanding your personal EQ and how that impacts the board that you sit on. You might have been a great executive. That doesn't necessarily mean you'll be a great board member. And you have to understand your impact to the board in which you sit on. I think if you're well aware of that, that will give you a leg up in your board journey. But if you're not aware of that, that might hold you back. Those would be my 2 top ones.
So I want to come back to sort of the challenge of being the first on a board. We're seeing less of that now, right? And there is now a greater opportunity for women to promote women on boards, as you've been doing with mentoring other women as well. I mean, is this now, in your thoughts, a big change? Are we now in a different environment than we were when you started out? And have you noticed that on the boards that you've been serving on?
I'm happy to answer that, Andrew. I would say definitely. Your CEO question, I was trying to add a second female on one of my boards, mining boards, and the board chair said, no, we're looking for a CEO, a retired CEO. And I said, I don't think we need a 3rd or 4th retired CEO on this board. We need another female. And I got pushback saying no. So I think that's changed. I think it's evolved over time. I think what people are looking for nowadays are specialists versus generalists. And I think that's where you can say, I'm looking for a female accountant or a female lawyer to sit on the board. And they have certain skills that the board needs. I think that's changed over time. But I do still think there are some board chairs out there that think they are looking for another retired CEO to sit on that board.
And Michelle, your experience, has things changed?
I have similar thoughts to Wendy. I think that there is still the proclivity for some to default to needing a CEO. I experienced that as well, and I do think that the ever evolving and changing nature of corporate environments and the external pressures in the world around us is, I think, also driving a bit broader thinking around the skills that are required to continue to take the organization and the board forward, especially to support potentially diverse management teams who are taking the organization forward from their seats. So I do think it's moving. I think there are some remnants of past practices that still surface in conversations from time to time, but I think we just need to continue to have the right conversation and to continue to perhaps challenge those prior biases or what some may have considered norms.
That hopefully gets me into the next question I wanted to ask, which is really on the boards that you are serving on. How do the organizations for which you're a director address gender diversity, and what practices have they adopted to enhance the diversity of the board? And I might this time start with you, Michelle.
So I think we're seeing a real increase in more intentional activities around boards addressing gender diversity. I know you've commented on some of that in your report, Andrew. The boards on which I serve focus focus on gender diversity through written governance documents. So whether that's a board diversity policy or a matrices that's used in as an anchor to recruitment. So what I like about these types of mechanisms is that they not only demonstrate commitment, because again, if you're going to pen policy and go through that, you're demonstrating a commitment and it's publicly available. They also keep the topic of gender diversity and broad diversity a priority. And that, I think, contributes greatly in that anchor when recruiting for directors. Because again, if the topic is surfaced and it's in a policy or in a matrix, a matrix that needs to be, recruited against, that's hard to argue against. So I would say those are the couple of ways I see that in the boards I serve on.
So I'm going to leverage part of that and just mention another tool that Osler was involved in, which is we worked with the Institute of Corporate Directors to create a customizable, downloadable board diversity policy. You enter a few data points and you press the button and it spits out a diversity policy. And why did we do that? Well, the reason was because with a diversity policy, you could have a conversation at the board level on something concrete. You would bring people's attention to something, like the words actually matter, because if it's just a discussion, it's too easy to dismiss it. But if you have something you actually focus on, you will tend to get more thoughtful approach to the topic. So
fantastic. Well, thank you for making it easy.
Always. So I know, Wendy, you have a few thoughts and some experiences on the boards that you serve on to increase gender diversity.
And my personal view is term limits and age limits certainly help with gender diversity, in the sense that when certain people are coming off the board, they're going to retire, and that helps with the transparency of saying, you know what, I'm looking for a female lawyer, and you're looking for a female lawyer. You're not looking for a lawyer, you're looking for a female lawyer to go on that board. And I think that that's extremely helpful. The other component I like to add is when we're recruiting, there's certain things that you have to have, and there's certain things that are nice to have. And I've looked at some recruiting documents, and the list of have to haves are like a mile long. And I'm thinking, my God, you're never going to find that candidate because it's going to be a unicorn. And so as a board, I think we have to decide, if we have the perfect candidate, but they don't tick all the boxes, are we happy to live with that? And can we help them tick all the boxes, in the sense of, if they're missing corporate governance, do we send them on courses like ICD? If they're missing things like industry knowledge, can the company help them with onboarding to get that information? So it's finding the right candidate. They might not necessarily tick all the boxes. And as a company, we need to get them there. And here's a perfect example. I'm an accountant. I come from the mining industry, and I chair the board of an energy nuclear company and a bus manufacturing company. Not my industries of expertise, but I would have to say, between the management team and my fellow board members, I got a crash course in a lot of that. And that to me is important, to have the support of the company or the board you're on to provide you with the knowledge you need to be a great board member.
I really like that, because frankly, if you're going to reach out, this applies both to women and to other diverse communities, you're going to find people with varying degrees of experience on board service, and sometimes you're just going to need to supplement what the skill set that they have with additional training, so that they can provide just as big a contribution as any of the other board members. And it is important to sort of remember that and plan for it as part of your onboarding process at an organization. Both great advice and good practices from both of you. I might ask now, and this is actually one of the questions that's popped up on the chat. And by the way, for those that are attending, please send in your questions through the chat. We are looking forward to answering them. But if you are embarking upon your journey, and a number of the people that are viewing the webinar today are embarking upon their journey. What is the one piece of advice that you would give to somebody that's just starting their board journey? Maybe I'll turn to Michelle this time.
Absolutely. You know, the best piece of advice I received when I first started my board journey was this. The individual said to me, as you begin your research, reflect on what is important to you so that you can be prepared to also say no when an organization is not of interest. And while it sounds like it's stating the obvious, we need to be able to know what we are interested in and not. I think that's been an important thing for me in my personal journey as I reflect on how much time commitment I have, to give and what those organizations look like. So to somebody, it might begin with a particular industry of interest or a particular board composition that one might want to learn from and be a part of. Whatever the criteria is, do as much homework as you can to determine if your interests are aligned.
Fantastic advice. And Wendy, I might ask you, what do you think in terms of the one piece of advice that you would give to somebody that's just starting their journey?
A little similar to Michelle's, I would say be patient. Don't rush out and take the first opportunity that you're offered. I think it's important for you to make sure that the board you're going to sit on is the right fit for you. And it goes back to culture as well, and the value that you can add on the board. But getting off a board is complicated and difficult. So make sure you choose wisely. I know people will say, oh, I've been offered my first board, I'm going to take it. Make sure you pause and say, is it the right place for me? Can I see myself there 5 years down the road or 10 years down the road? If you can't see yourself, it might not be the right fit, and therefore politely decline. And then the next role will come. And believe me, the roles will come. You just have to be patient.
It's a bit of a hard message, I think, to be patient, be picky when you are just starting your journey there. I mean, it's good sound advice from the voice of experience there, but a bit hard to try to implement in practice. A lot of boards, when they embarked upon their journey to increase the representation of women, they did go out and recruit specifically for a woman, as you indicated, Wendy. I mean, if somebody is approaching you because they've said we're looking specifically for a woman, is that a sign that there's a problem that you should maybe say no to that opportunity, or is there other things that you should be doing when you get approached on the basis that they are focused specifically on finding a woman candidate? Wendy, I might turn to you.
Sure. I would say ask them if they're looking for a female, or are they looking for a female with your skills and experience, right? What is it that they're hoping to achieve with adding a female? My case was they were looking for an accountant to chair an audit committee. And that seemed to be easy to say, I'm looking for a female accountant to chair the audit committee. And like Michelle said, do your research. Take a look at, their management circular information, their AIF. Take a look at the statistics if there's females in the executive group, or there are other females. If there's probably no females on the board, but are there other executives in the other females in the executive group? I've been on a board where I was the only female around the table. There was no female at the executive team. And I'll be honest, I was the only one of a visible minority. I was the first of all things. And it was difficult. It was challenging. Did I learn a hell of a lot? Absolutely. Would I do it again? Probably not.
Okay. Michelle, what are your thoughts?
Oh, do you know what? I echo Wendy's comments, and having been the only woman on a senior executive team as well, I know that thought, and as you do your homework and your research or due diligence as it pertains to that board, So I think if you sit in deep curiosity and have questions answered that might be sitting at the front of your mind, wondering, get those answered. Go with that feeling inside if you are really unsure as to why they're interested in you. Probe, ask the questions. And if you really don't get a good feeling, again, you can say no and you can wait for the next thing or look for the next opportunity.
Okay, very solid. So coming back to the questions that we've got in the Q&A, one of them is, what's the advice that you would give to becoming effective in the role of a director if you are just starting out, especially if you are the only woman? So you've looked at the board, you've done your diligence, you've concluded that you could add value to the board and you have something to contribute. But how do you make sure that you are going to be most effective in that role, especially if there are no other women on the board and you're sitting there in your situation, Wendy, where you're even facing a whole table with executives and directors and there are no women surrounding you? Michelle, I'll start with you this time.
So I'm a big believer in kind of learning plans. And so if you're in that situation and you recognize the contributions you can make, I'd say double down on that and create a learning plan for yourself so that you can be an effective contributor at that table, whether you're a woman or not. And so understanding, looking back at prior, board and committee materials, the public company, listen to the analyst calls, get an understanding about what the external market or the questions that come, at the executive and management team at those quarterly calls. Do your homework to really get an understanding of what's come before you and how you can contribute going forward.
Very solid. Do your homework, but do your homework in not just generally before you accept the board position, but on a continuous basis once you're there, so that you are fully apprised of what the expectations are and what investors and other communities that the company interacts with are expecting from directors. Very solid. Wendy, what are your thoughts in terms of being
I would
effective?
add to that and ask for feedback. Ask for feedback from the board chair. Ask for feedback from the CEO. Things that you could do better, and they're always, the CEO and the board chair should always have things that you can do better or things that they say, oh, maybe you should stop doing. And that will make you more efficient and more effective as well. But I agree with Michelle. You have to do your homework. You have to read all the materials. I think gone are the days when you see people going into the boardroom with the printed copy of all the board materials and are reviewing it during the meeting. I think those days are long gone.
Now, it can be assuming that you've done all of the homework and you are fully prepared for the board meeting. Speaking up can be a very difficult thing to do. You're new. The other members of the board have probably been there for years and they know each other quite well. You're just getting to know them. I mean, how do you find the ability to actually pose your questions and overcome the concern that maybe your questions are so obvious that they're not really worth asking at this point? Wendy, what are your thoughts in terms of how to do that?
So as board chair, if I have a new board member, I will often reach out to them after the materials have been sent, but before the board meeting. So they've got questions or concerns and they feel they're dumb questions and they're really not, then they have the ability to ask me as board chair in advance. I would also say it's important for a new board member to have a board buddy. I know it sounds ridiculous, but a board buddy probably is your longest serving board member. So they can, during the middle of meeting, they don't understand something, or it could be an acronym they don't understand. They can turn around and say, excuse, what does that mean? And just doing those two little things will impact that new board member, will make them feel welcome. I will also ask the CEO to reach out to them as well. If there's questions that I, as a board chair, can't answer, a CEO could, just make them feel welcome. I've also had the situation where a new board member was appointed to a board, and the CEO asked me I'm not involved at all with that company, but they asked me if I would be a board buddy to them, just to hear them out, somebody externally. And you know what? Quite impressed that a CEO would do that and made this particularly diverse young board member very successful in her first round of meetings.
Right, because you want to enable the people around the table to contribute to the best that they can. And so, Michelle, overcoming some of those self-imposed obstacles that might be there beyond what the chair can do. What other suggestions do you have?
Oh, well, just building on what Wendy shared, as the beneficiary of a board buddy, I can tell you there's huge value and benefit to being a new board member who has that person you can talk to. Not only leveraging, I think, the chair of the board, but the chair of committees that you're on. You're building relationship, right? You're joining a new team. You're joining a new leadership team. And yes, you're new. But start to build those relationships. So certainly what I've done in the past is also leverage the chair of the HR committee in those instances, for example. So, hey, I really appreciate your thoughts as to, when we're in board, in the board meetings themselves, any advice for me? Typically, how does this unfold? If you have foresight or forethought around this question, and you have an onboarding program, ask it then as well. Ask it, as part of the onboarding. So how does this typically unfold? What are the unwritten rules of engagement, so to speak, at these tables? And for me, I've been also very fortunate to have had some really strong board chairs who are very natural at engaging everybody around the table. So that also helps.
Very, very good, strong, just need to understand the culture, need to understand what you're getting into in terms of the personal dynamics. And that I think echoes a little bit about sort of understanding the personal EQ, which was a point, Wendy, that you raised. And one of the questions that we've got now speaks to, can you expand on your understanding of personal EQ and it's the impact of it on the board that you're sitting on?
I'll start that one. So if I've got, and I usually have questions on all the materials I've read, but if we're running late, everybody else has their hand up. I often think to myself, do I need to ask my question to make my decision? If my answer is no, I won't ask it and I'll just move on. I might ask it later after the decision's made, but understanding where you are in terms of that particular meeting. Or if I've got lots of questions, I will send a note to the CEO or whoever, if it's the chair of the audit committee or the CFO, and get them answered then. But understanding the role you play, right? You have to be aware of, are you the one asking all the questions? Are you the one who always asks for more materials versus somebody else who wants less materials? Understanding what type of board member you are. Are you the board member who wants to be a great board member or just an okay board member? Are you the board member that reads all your materials and can find all the commas that are missing, and you decide that you need to start the meeting with telling everybody where those missing commas are, which is now 20 minutes into your meeting and you've got 2.5 hours, right? So understanding yourself, like I'll find those and I'll send them off before the meeting so they're done, right? But I'm not going to drag the meeting on just because I need to be the center of attention. I'm not like that at all. And I will listen. And often if, I've run into situations where somebody cuts off one of my fellow board members, I will actually say, excuse me, I do want to hear what they have to say. So can you stop interrupting? Let them finish, right? That changes the dynamic in that boardroom because the person who wants to speak and can't now has the ability to finish what they wanted to say. And so you know what? You have to understand how you impact your board I think that is extremely critical. If you want to have a career as a board member, you need to understand your role at the table.
So a couple of things I just want to draw out of that, the recognition that board service isn't just what you do at a board meeting, right? The board service occurs between meetings. And as you suggest, Wendy, being able to ask the questions in advance of the meeting so that you're able to focus on what is really important in that limited amount of time you have at the board meeting to get to the heart of the matter and reach a conclusion is very useful. Dealing with the minor typographical and grammatical errors and getting those fixed in advance or ex post the meeting, so that again you make the most out of the time you have and you get the most out of the people that you have there. Very strong and important things to remember about what it is that a director is supposed to contribute there. Michelle, sort of personal EQ and what are some of the things that you would want people to think about when they are stepping into the board service role?
Yeah, just building on all of what Wendy has shared, knowing your role, I really do agree is critical. And I might approach it from the perspective of transitioning from management to board director. So for some, that's a harder transition, because if you've been in an executive officer role and you've led a portfolio or had that mandate, the proclivity may be to want to go really deep into the topic as if you're actually that management representative. And I think being able to and being passionate about a topic or a portfolio is great. Just remembering though that your role is not of management. So you're not leading that function. Your role is of oversight and governance. And with that, deciding the kind of board director you want to be. I often say, do you want to be the gotcha board member where you're the one who's in the middle of meetings trying to catch, oh, I found that comma, I found that mistake, or I heard you say this, but this is wrong. And again, I'm not that way. And maybe some people continue to have successful board careers by operating that way, but I encourage leading with real curiosity and positive inquiry. So if there is something that you're not sure about that surfaces in a meeting, rather than lead with a potential accusation or allegation or assumption, I should say, how about leading with a question and maybe make a note to yourself how to frame it into a positive question? Because again, as board directors, we don't sit in management seats day in, day out. We come in, and yes, there's information and engagement in between meetings, but we have to lead with trust in management, and we have to enter those rooms actively listening and leading with positive inquiry and frankly, in some cases, a growth mindset, because we might not know everything about the topics that are being surfaced as well. So I'd say all of those things together for me, Andrew, kind of fall into what I would encourage people to think about here.
And one of the best questions, and this might be helpful for people to think about, is when there is something that is puzzling or you think might be incorrect in what you've received, asking the question, can you help me understand the thinking behind this, or how you got to the conclusion, right? It avoids the prejudgment, as you said, Michelle, and you might actually find that some of your concerns were in fact addressed, and the conclusion may have been a little bit surprising to you on first glance, but with a little bit more background maybe makes more sense than you thought initially, and again avoids a confrontational type of debate, which is again not what you're looking for. You're looking for a partnership. You're looking for being able to provide good leadership and make sure that management has really thought about things. So I wanted to now, I guess we're at the very end of this. Okay, well, I've got lots of other questions, but we'll save them for another day, and I will now hand it over to Deborah. But before I do, Wendy, Michelle Gosh, this was a great conversation, and I enjoyed my time speaking with both of you. And Deborah, I'm going to turn it over to you to bring the event to a conclusion.
Well, thank you, Andrew. Thank you, Wendy. And thank you, Michelle. I could have listened to you all afternoon, so I didn't really want to turn on my screen to let you know I was coming in. There were a couple questions, and maybe what I might encourage, there was a couple questions in the chat. If Wendy, Michelle, and Andrew are okay, if individuals follow up with you directly on LinkedIn, because I think they were some good questions and I don't want to lose sight of them. So there were a couple of them, and who I saw Angela and Lisa as too. Maybe you can ask them directly, the panelists, and I'm sure Michelle, Wendy, and Andrew, you'll be okay with that.
Absolutely.
So your passions, your insights, I mean, it really is a journey. And I think you've taken us on a journey of where you've been, where you are now. And I really like the idea that you commented. It's about, you can have the best IQ, in my opinion, of having all the governance knowledge, but it's the EQ that you combine that really makes you impactful as a director. So thank you all. I want to let you know we will be donating to our charity partner, which is Dress for Success Toronto chapter for today, for your time. Also, I want to thank Oslers for sponsoring today's Women Get on Board, a virtual speaker series. So thank you. Following this session, you'll get a link for a survey. So we really want to hear back from you on the event today. You'll also receive a recording of this session in a few days to follow, but you will get a copy of the slides. You will get a copy of the Osler's Diversity Disclosure Report that Andrew highlighted. And we just want everyone to know that our next Women Get on Board virtual speaker series will be on January 24th. It will be sponsored by Southleigh Group, and it will be on global trends in pay for performance, which is an area that all boards need to be thinking about at an executive level and at a board level. So to your board journey, if we don't see you until the new year, happy holidays, and be safe and be healthy. Thank you.
Thank you.